Hello and welcome. This is the Work That Matters podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Elizabeth Eastman, and these are conversations that take place at the intersection of personal and business growth. I am having this conversation from my office in Dublin, Ireland, over in Rathmines, just south of the canal. And today I'm joined by Dr. Kim Jobst from the UK. He is a medical physician. He is a naturopath, metaphysician, a consultant in the area of teleology, and he's written a really interesting paper titled "That Disease is a Manifestation of Health." I have invited Dr. Kim onto the show today to discuss the space between disaster and triumph. What is it? Why would we even want to consider it? Who do we become? Who do we be in that space? And why it's so advantageous for us to know about it. There's a lot of ground we cover, and it is my intention that this conversation is not only interesting to you, but it works hard to maybe spark an idea or shift a perception for you about what's possible in your world today. Welcome back, Dr. Kim Jobst. Another conversation at the intersection of personal and business growth. I was recording my trailer for the podcast. As you know, Pete, my beloved dear friend Pete over near LA, when I originally presented the script to him for the trailer, because he's got an amazing radio voice, and suggested, I even gave him sample, do you know Alana? Alana. No, the trailer has to be your voice. It has to be like from the heart and mean it. So I was recording the trailer this morning because the podcast is going live on the 19th of June with a pre-stacked set of episodes. And as I was trying to figure out what Pete would want me to put in the trailer, I heard myself saying that conversations at the intersection of personal and business growth are the exact conversations that we want to be having when we leave our comfort zone. And sometimes we end up having those conversations by ourselves, wishing we had someone knowledgeable or who's been on that path a few times before to be conversing with us. But I reckon the moment you leave one's comfort zone, like these are the conversations that show up in the stuff between, well, comfort zones and those 3 feet to everything you want. So the quote that you brought to the conversation today:
if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two imposters just the same.
Rudyard Kipling's poem, If.
Yeah.
One of my dad's favorites. Actually, that line is probably still one of my dad's favorites. Tell me where that quote lands in you. What does it mean? What do you extrapolate from it?
Well, the first thing I want to say is that at this point in my life, that poem is the quintessential expression of all spiritual literature in one place, and would be, if I could only take one thing with me through my life, it would be that.
That's a pretty big statement.
It is. And I'm reading from the magnificent rendering of it that my mother made for my 21st birthday, which is incredibly beautiful. And I would just so love those who are listening to be able to see it, because it's a masterpiece.
I'll share a link with it in the episode description.
Okay, let's do that.
The meaning of this quote to you and how it lands in the context of personal and business growth.
So there's so much in it, because Kipling was a bit like Hemingway in that he fought to find the quintessential meaning of a word, and he sought to be able to write with as few words as possible to express the most. So his choice of imposters will be no accident. And it's really alerting us, offering us an opportunity to see that a one-sided life cannot exist, that we cannot live solely in triumph, and nor can or will we live solely in disaster, that they are inextricably interlinked, and that there is a possibility for a human being to live through both and to be in the middle, and that in the middle there is a possibility for him to awaken to a state of being that can navigate everything that is happening and to use it as feedback.
If we were to take this conversation and apply it to a living, tangible example, do you have one to hand? Because you're more than welcome to use me and my example, our history together. But if you had a current one, someone who's a business person who has experienced disaster and is able to stand in the middle, or that you're working with to stand in the middle of it?
I think we can actually use our own lives at different times where we could see disaster as being those moments in our lives where it feels as though we have lost everything, or where the business is on the edge of collapse, where emotional, mental and physical strength has been completely drained and we don't know if we can go on. And we can also refer to those moments where we've felt as though everything was going right, where there's a sort of form of ecstasy at having pulled something off and being seduced by the magic of that and the energy of that, and thinking, yeah, I've got it, and then experiencing how rapidly one can go down the slide and into a mud puddle, because life is seeking to bring us back to center. So in the moments of disaster, if I speak for myself, of having to pick up and start again with almost nothing, except my own will and vision, and actually I'm going to use the word love for life and hope. So the big words, faith and hope and love, that means we feel like we feel awful. But there is something that says, I'm not giving up.
Mm.
And in those moments, what is interesting is sometimes what things are feel as if they have been taken away, and we then need to stand in that space and reassess, get a different perspective, reach out. And there's a delicate balance between reaching out, trying to get help and becoming dependent, and being able to stand alone and receive the feedback. So the key thing I want to say is that practicing again and again and again and again and again and again to remember that it's feedback to get us on purpose, to get us to land. Yeah.
Disaster is feedback.
Yeah. And
so is triumph.
And so is triumph. And the feedback from triumph is not to be swept away by it.
The feedback from triumph. So I love how you described it as the magic, the ecstasy, the magic of pulling something off or achieving something. It's such a beautiful way to articulate it. In that moment, there is a sense of being congruent. There's a sense of validation. There's a sense of wanting to continue the path. And there's a potential for that ecstatic, magic feeling to become hyperbolic, in which case my Jungian lecture would suggest that if it becomes too hyperbolic, the universe feels the need to humble you. And if you don't heed the universe's invitation to be humble, poised, in balance, then it'll bring baseball bats and even a bus, literally killing you off. I still laugh at that. I heard it in the last 3 or 4 months, and I'm just in awe of how powerful, particularly in Jungian psychology studies, how powerful they perceive and observe the unconscious, the spirit self, the universe to be in this type of activity. And DeMartini as well. I don't want to get sidetracked, but I'm very aware of DeMartini's narrative on the pedestal and the pit, and being able to stay in balance between the two. There's there's so many ways I want to take this right now, but I would like to be present to unpacking a bit more of the language around the space that one gets to step into in order to observe the feedback. And in this particular context, we're going with disaster. Because whilst I fully appreciate and love that I get to step into that space today, when I first heard you invite me to this concept 6 or 7 years ago now, Kim,
Mm-hmm.
I had no framework with which to even understand what you were talking about. So what is this space that we get to step into as disaster rises up to meet us as a feedback?
Well, it's the space of meaning. As you know, we cannot overstate the importance of meaning. To treat those two imposters just the same means to have a reference point. And very often, as you will have been exploring in your Jungian work, we don't know what the reference point is because it sits in our unconscious. And I personally, it's more than belief. My life has brought me to a place where I have certainty about the fact that every single human being, without exception, has purpose. And that purpose may be global in an ordinary sense of its sphere of influence. It may be very local. The more work I do, the more I realize that there is actually no distinction between them, and we might be able to get to that. But that's kind of standing on the 10th step. And I think what's really important at the beginning is, first of all, to realize that one does have purpose, and it's because we have purpose that we can perceive certain things to be triumphs and other things to be disasters. I suspect you found very similarly to me that when I ask people what their purpose is or what they think it is, the vast majority can't articulate it. But they will share a resonance with the fact that they do have one. And the work, whether it is in a business context or a healing context, a therapeutic context, is about uncovering that and creating a foundation on which to build the stairway.
Well said. I'm curious about why Kipling used the word imposter, as he referred to both triumph and disaster.
Because I would love to have met Kipling. I would really love to have been able to get a face-to-face sense of the man. But it is my impression that he was a deeply spiritual being who suffered enormously, who was inspired by an insatiable curiosity and a very powerful force to create and communicate. His sense of the divine order, that life had meaning, life had purpose, and it had order. And if is the most magnificent articulation of that. Now, from that perspective, being beguiled by triumph or beguiled by disaster is to lose the full view. You know, it's a bit like saying you get to the top of the mountain, to the 10th step, and all you can see is the magnificent view, and you forget that there's a precipice on one side, and while you're trying to take the perfect picture, you fall backwards over it and tumble down to the bottom and whatever. Or getting to the top and being so absolutely overcome by the fact that you're exhausted and you've got to find your way down again that you forget to look at the view. Yeah. And that.
So imposter and disaster, polarized, extremes, or was there something about, that was my thought process when I first read the term imposter as it applied to disaster and triumph, is that they were extreme conditions, and that operating inside the tension or the balance of both of them was important. And then the other thing that I was thinking about as I reflected on the word imposter was zooming out of the current. This is interesting because I'm about to say zoom out of the present moment, but it's not zooming out of the present moment. It's zooming out of the present detail of disaster to take a much more visionary look at what is showing up. Here's where the recontextualization or the reassessment of meaning can appear, so that we can see this particular disaster that showed up on a Tuesday at 3 p.m. in the context of the much bigger tapestry that is this business or life or project that we're bringing out into the world. Not to get lost in the details, but to zoom out and look at a much bigger picture.
Yeah. Which is not, it's not easy.
It is once you find that space to stand in between the two. It's easier. It's much easier.
Yes, it is. But what I want to acknowledge and to remind you of are those moments when you can't see it, when it just feels overwhelming, desperate, hopeless, and you just want to tick it out.
I'd be familiar with all of that.
Mm-hmm. I thought you might. And it's it's also a very wonderful thing when one has done enough work to know that it is possible to re-equilibrate and to step through that gateway to another place.
So if I were to
refer to it as the 3 feet.
3 feet. The 3 feet is the 3 feet to go from what is my head to my heart. And the 3 feet, because I'm guessing it's 3 feet.
A lot less than that. But
those 3 steps to go from what is very cerebral and thinking and ego-based and fear and shame and culture and society and other people's opinion, ego. The ego state is what I'm describing. To go from the ego state to what is the heart center, the heart space. Well, in the beginning, it's deeply abstract if you're hearing it for the first time. It's kind of like water and sand running through your fingers, not at the same time. It's just like you have nothing to hold on to. And then there's a spark that occurs, and I recall several sparks throughout my life, childhood included, but the one I want to speak to here is the one that I had in your office over in Harley Street, where there was a spark between the head, the ego self, and the heart self. during the process of the Telos that was so deeply rooted and deeply visceral in me that I couldn't not know it happened. And it was enough to keep me seeking out another spark, a longer experience of a spark, until today I'm able to have a conversation with you and the spark is more than it isn't. And there was this magic that occurred, a magic ecstasy, I'm going to say. In the moment, my head and my heart were able to connect in a way that it had never done so before. And in that integration of head and heart, I found my way into the space. I found my way into the space that allows me to be able to stand calmly, disaster, triumph, and I hold those two imposters as if they're the same. I'm not sure I could have found that space without going through the heart. I don't think you would disagree.
No. So you put it beautifully. I'm just wondering how many people listening will know what you mean by the telos. So perhaps let me just recap for people, because what I did was take you through an exercise. And to contextualize that exercise, we had met initially for very powerful medical reasons, with you struggling with certain definable symptoms that had a physiological and metabolic basis.
I was really sick and I was referred to you. That's how I would describe it.
Okay.
Go on.
I just want to respect your the integrity of your narrative, and the evolution of my work has left me in no doubt whatsoever any longer that all symptoms are feedback to enable us to become aligned with the underlying purpose of our life, each of us. And I don't want that to sound overly grandiose. It can be very simple and it can be very big, but it's important. And, and I've written about it and published about it. But for you in those early stages, there was an enormous amount of trust that I was bringing you into something which hadn't happened in any other physician's office, specifically because what I have found in my work is that when that becomes clear, the reference point that you can relate the triumph and disaster to becomes manifest. In other words, meaning. So in taking you through that exercise, which confronts you with what is most important to you in the context of potential death, allows you to see how what is happening is actually serving you. And when that happens, your heart opens, because it's no longer desperate and there's no longer it's a prison from which you have no way out. What you suddenly see is that by asking these simple yet powerful questions, what DeMartini calls quality questions, it's possible to redefine the landscape. And so then a path begins to emerge and make sense. And I agree with you totally that when the heart opens, there's a completely different energy that becomes available, completely different.
I'm not sure we defined the telos yet, but I would say it's based in the study of teleology, which is the end in mind. This is where the telos has been birthed from and out of. And if you had to describe the Telos experience in 2 sentences, how would you articulate that?
The Telos experience is a vehicle, a method, a journey, which leads you to discovering or to uncovering the ultimate purpose of your life. as an individual, and no two teloses are the same. They are fingerprint specific to the individual. It's at one level, it's very simple. At another, it's, as you know, very challenging. But what emerges is life transforming, and can serve one for a very long time.
We sidebarred into the Telus because we were talking about the space between disaster and triumph, and how grateful it is not lost on me that I'm using the words easy to stand between disaster and triumph, but how grateful I am to know that space and to have it dominate. Doesn't feel like the right word, but to have it more present in my life than not. But you're right. In the beginning, I felt like I was blindfolded and being kind of dropped off on the side of the road and just kind of like, what? I don't understand who or where or how. And yet somehow was led to it and was able to play with it and now stand and teach from it, which I think opening up a whole new field to work within, a new energy, a new access to creativity and possibility is extraordinary in this space. You brought this particular quote into our conversation today, clearly because you're a Kipling fan. I look forward to seeing that birthday gift from your mom and how she presented it to you. What prompted this particular conversation today? I'd invited you to do it, and I'm just wondering what prompted this.
It's a great question. I mean, I'm going to be ridiculously simple.
Yeah.
I was searching for a quote that we could use to feed into your questions, your great questions, that has seemingly two sides, the integration of which leads to a different state, and that would be useful to people in business and on their journeys, using their businesses to grow as human beings, to what we call self-actualize.
So if you were to...
And sorry, just to say, so I was thinking about a quote and it just popped in, as inspiration does. I mean, where does inspiration come from? I don't have an easy answer to that one. And every now and then it comes and it's just like, you know, and we love those moments. I love those moments anyway.
They're very welcome. So I'm going to bring, with your permission, one scenario to the fore. We have, we as in Teacher Brand to Fish has a number of clients in the financial services industry. And there was this one client in particular who had approached me, and he was very aware that in the last 10 years, he had experienced what is a very public, I can use the word disaster because we're in the Kipling poem today, but he'd experienced a very public disaster. And in the first few years, he was able to kind of, quote unquote, pull back and shrink away, hide a little bit, and make do with the financial status that he was in. But the heart song, the heart wants what the heart wants. And there's a desire for him to show up inside of his own business, a tech business, in the financial services space. Now, one of the biggest struggles that he has is not finding a business partner to do it with him that he can hide behind, but showing up himself and being seen. And so as I consider the disaster that this individual had experienced publicly, there's no ability to see triumph in any form over the last 10 years. And now there's an inability to show up because of the disaster from 10 years ago. So looking at this poem in the light of this conversation, let's call him Johnny. If Johnny were to walk into your office over in Harley Street and just present what I presented to you with a desperate, I'll use the word desperate deliberately here, there's a desperate desire to kind of get over and fix the the very thing that's holding him back, what would you see and what would your counsel be, given what I've just shared here?
Mm-hmm. Well, the first thing is that I'd greet him. And I want to hear his story. And I want to hear his story in his words. I want to find out where his pain is and why that's painful for him. I want to ask him what the outcome is that he's seeking to achieve. And I want to ask him how he will know when he's got that outcome. Which may seem like an obvious question, but actually answering it sometimes is very challenging for people. Because most of the time, we're looking for a feeling as an outcome. There may be an external outcome, like I want to see £1 million in the bank or whatever it might be. But actually that is associated with a feeling. And I also find that invariably that feeling has a location, a physical location in the human, in each person. And it's unique to those people, to each person. And by the time we've got there, it's pretty much in every case. And that may take 5 minutes, it might take a whole hour.
Or 5 hours.
Or 5. If I have the luxury of 5 hours. And I love it when that's the case. They will be in a different state already. And then I will begin to explore their own sense of meaning and purpose. And my experience may, in that situation, be relevant on the basis of the many, many people that I've worked with and the experience that I've had. And then we will start to create a map. We'll start to make a strategy together. And
would you introduce the space at that early stage?
By that time, they will, generally speaking, one will have already tasted that space. I don't seek to introduce it. Generally speaking, what I seek to do is to walk alongside someone as they discover it. Because it's only when it is discovered personally that it has real meaning and real physiological consequences. Because when it's happened, now, if I may, I'd like to introduce some of the words that I use for it. Because as you know, from the depth of the work that we've done, I am certain that everything has meaning, and that meaning is unique to each individual. So one thing that my 35 years has, as a professional, has taught me and brought me to is that it is not my job to interfere with that process. It's my job to be as hands-off as possible and to help hold a space in which that can be discovered, be born. But in the context of meaning and purpose, we get to evaluate what has happened and to build a structure, to create a strategy in their language, in their terms, in the context of their life. Now, that is not always easy. And it may involve doing a telos. It may not. It may involve, a questionnaire, some exercises, some vision work. It may involve working with other people. It may involve some, physical investigations, because sometimes people come and they're utterly depleted, just exhausted. So one needs to remember that every human being is a combination of, 100% human and 100% divine. So the term I want to introduce is that meaning that is unique to each person is what enables them to see that there is what I call a divine order. And what do I mean by divine? I just mean something that is so way bigger than us, that underpins the manifestation of all life. I'm only here by virtue of the fact that life exists. You're only here by virtue of life existing. Most of the time, we're not aware of it. We forget it. And when we become aware of it, we become aware of an order, an incredibly sophisticated and complex order where everything is interrelated. Now, the experience of that can be overwhelming at times. And to recontextualize disaster in that framework is a big part of the beginning of the work. And that recontextualization, in my experience, only happens in relation to their sense of meaning and purpose, each person's sense of meaning and purpose. It can be as I'm just thinking of somebody at the moment whose business was sliding into collapse, and what actually came out of the work was actually my family is more important than my business. Simple.
Yeah.
So simple at one level, but actually when that's recognized, everything starts to
reconfigure. Yeah. That's
and then energy flows.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yes, that's so true. That's so true.
And if I may, with you, for example, which is ongoing, as for me, but the realization now, 6 years on, that first image that emerged out of you was about helping people get out of prison, was all about shifting perspective, changing meaning. It could be completely physical prisons, but so much of what I perceive you to be doing, for example, is enabling people to see the constructs within which they are working, and then to find the door that seemed to be hidden, to step out and look back at it and go, I don't need to stay there. I'm my own janitor and my own liberator.
Yeah. And for anyone listening, the picture he's referring to is an image that came out of the Telos Experience. I believe it was in May 2014. I had an experience with yourself in Harley Street on I think it was the 15th of May, 2014. If not, it was close enough. And I had another one with you in Prague and your co-facilitator, Clara. And I think it'd be really incredible to do a conversation between you, Clara, and myself on my experience of that. Because I do know that when I share the story of my experience with the Telus constellation in Prague, the first response I get from people is, I want to do that. Tell me more about that. Who's Clara? It was a very powerful experience. And so if I were to describe it to anyone listening who was just like me going, tell what? It is a tool with which I use to move from my cerebral thinking, headstrong, stubborn, absolutely blinkered focus to seeing those expand and open up and still stay there because I found out I like them, to reveal to me another portion of the deck of cards that just allowed me to navigate and manage and play life with a toolbox full of really cool tools instead of the hammer that I've been using for the first 34 years, 35 years. Really powerful experience. And as I go through my Jungian psychology degree, I look back on those times and I connect dots, as you do, with Carl Jung's work on symbols and shapes, colors, and experiences, which is the language of the unconscious. And being able to access it and pull it on the table and examine it, explore it in ways that you and Clara both at different times, but you both facilitated for me, has been an extraordinary part of my journey. It's been incredible. And I think that's another reason why I want to continue this conversation that lives at the intersection of personal and business growth. I know I'm talking a lot, but I want to keep going for just one more second here, maybe 10. Personal growth is business growth when you're a business owner. And who I be is directly proportional to what I do and what shows up in my business. And the greatest thing that I did was connect my head and heart so that I could play this game of life and run the business that I run in this space. This is the space that I would love everybody to at least be able to stand in for 5 minutes. It took me 30, probably 40 years to find it. Because even when I worked with you for the first few years, I was getting glimpses of it, but being able to turn it on and keep it on for 12 hours a day, that took me a long time to figure out. Extraordinary. I'd love to invite Clara and you to come and talk about the Telus constellation.
I think that would be a wonderful thing to do.
Yeah.
It's quite an interesting thing to try to articulate in words what a constellation is and how it works, but I think it's well worth doing, and I would like to, if I can just add a little bit to that narrative, the way you described the way you were functioning in today's world. I think it also has a lot of meaning for people to talk about the toxic masculine and feminine. And what I experienced in your Telos constellation was you being able to step into and experience yourself in your feminine and not having to function only in the doing of the masculine. And that makes a very big difference.
Agree. And I think, not that I want to do it here, but if I were to explore the Telos constellation experience with yourself and Clara on the show, it would have to be sharing a story of what I experienced, because I'm sure you can use language to explain it, but to hear someone's firsthand experience of it is powerful.
It's very powerful, and the same. Just not to leave it only on the feminine. It's also the same for the masculine. That one of the reasons that men get into trouble and get so exhausted is that they don't know how to tap into the immensely creative power of their feminine, the numinous part of them that receives the inspiration and that is so regenerative. And I don't mean that in any woo-woo sense at all. It is as real as saying that a plant needs water to grow. The water is that which is needed, and that's part of what we're working with.
So we definitely do that. I'll organize that after the show. If I bring back that quote as part of our wrap up here, if I meet triumph and disaster and treat those two imposters as if they were the same, and reflecting on the conversation that we've just moved through over the last 45 minutes or so, what are your final thoughts and your insights and takeaways for those listening today?
So the takeaway really is this. We think we want triumph only and we are running away from disaster because we think it reflects badly or whatever. But we don't fully understand what the state in the middle is. And what I want people to take away from these years of experience is that in the middle state, where you can take disaster as feedback and triumph as feedback, the middle state is a state of such joy. The middle state is flow. The middle state is flow. And we get into flow when we are able to be present enough to use each tiny little symptom of disaster to help us, and where we don't get seduced by triumph, that we then forget the handhold. As I'm speaking to you right now, I have the image of Alex Humboldt climbing, doing a free solo, and the presence of mind that is required for him to climb that wall that no one had ever climbed without ropes, without support, in just over 2 hours or 3 hours. It required such a focus in the now moment, so that every handhold that was triumph and every possible slip that would have been disaster, would have been death, was immediate feedback. And that's a remarkable state.
I love that analogy, and being present in the moment to the feedback is someone who now lives inside that continuously. It's glorious. My takeaway is actually also a visual of the equilibrium, or sorry, the harmony symbol.
Infinity symbol.
The infinity symbol. And if you were to imagine disaster to be at the far side of the far left side, with the words disaster written as you go up the infinity, down into the middle, down into the bottom right corner, coming up is the word triumph. As I'm stood in the center of the infinity symbol, I am receiving and giving both states, disaster and triumph, success and setback in my business. But as long as I am clutched to the outside wall of disaster, the center space looks so far away from me that I probably can't see it from my viewpoint. And the triumph is even further away. And as I cling to disaster, it causes a perspective that brings me right into the minutia, into the detail of 3 p.m. on a Tuesday, if you will. And the amount of effort that I need to take to climb my way back into the center of the infinity symbol is pretty significant. But as I stand in the middle of the infinity symbol, observing the right and left side of the infinity symbol as I stand in its center, I see that they both feed me and that I require both sides of them. And of course, having the experience of standing and operating in the center space of both disaster and triumph, I'm far enough away from the polarized edges of the infinity symbol that I can treat them both as imposters, that I can stay poised and actually grateful in the midst of it. And I thank you, because you have been instrumental over the last 7 years, working with me and through me and doing all sorts to help us tease out and get to what is this beautiful space of clarity.
Thank you too. It's always two-sided.
We play well together. We do play well together. What a beautiful, completely present to the moment, and then present inside an infinity visual, as if I was in kindergarten trying to describe that. Yeah, that's a really, really nice way to wrap up this conversation. Anything else to add before I bid you farewell?
No, I think that's great. I just hope that for those who are perceiving disaster, that they can see that hope is real. Hope is a force. It's an energy. It's real, and that we can always recontextualize what is happening.
I would add to that, in my experience only, of course, recontextualizing on your own challenging, difficult, probably not possible. I'd actually go that far. But being facilitated by another person who's present with you, who hears the shift in tone, who sees the micro expressions alter on your face and your being, they can help you identify the specific feedback in your reality today, and then follow that as if it has a thread going down into the underbelly of your unconscious, so that you can locate the root within the unconscious self that is driving this particular pattern that's causing you so much distress. And then, as you say, when you locate the root, you can recontextualize and give it new meaning, which actually is really important, because whatever you believe to be true, you will collect evidence to reinforce that you're right. That's a really important part to get, everybody. Whatever you believe to be true, and you'll know just by taking a look at your life, your reality cannot do anything except give you evidence to prove that you're right. And if what's going on down there is limiting, damaging, let's be honest, probably damaging, then recontextualizing it is absolutely important. I don't mean to laugh at it and make it a joke, but
no, it's crucial.
Yeah, it is crucial.
It's crucial. And first, the first part of the first part of that one cannot underestimate the importance of is the moment when one says, "Can you help me?" That reaching out, sometimes we have to be taken into the pits of disaster to be able to say, "Can you help me?" And that has already set the whole thing in motion.
Yes. Dr. Kim, I'm grateful to have you back. Always love these conversations with you. And let's get yourself and Clara back next time. Dr. Kim, namaste, brother.
Namaste. Thank you, Shannon.
The Work That Matters podcast, it's brought to you by ShannonEastman.com.